Okay. Hello, hello. Hope everybody's doing well out there.
Doing well. Thank you, David.
Absolutely. Susan, Charles, thanks for joining. And we are live here with another episode of This Week in Drones. We are typically live on Thursdays at 1 p.m., moved it to Friday this week. And actually, there's an event happening here this weekend called, it's actually the big event from the American Correctional Association. And Echodyne has a booth out there showing radars for drone detection, and Susan and Ondus are going out as well. And we invited the executive director, Rob Green, if he is able. He's actually on site right now at the conference, but if he's able to pop in, we'll say hi and maybe get some feedback from him. But otherwise, as part of the conversation today, we wanted to address and even hear from some of you out there who are listening in, who are tapping in and are concerned about drones being used to deliver contraband at prisons and what we're allowed to do about it. And also, what's coming in terms of the potential ability to mitigate the drones, to do something to stop them. As we know, currently federal law prohibits messing with a drone at all in any way if it's flying in the airspace. But there's a lot of chatter, a lot of things going on that we'll bring up here on this pod today, including states that are putting out their own state level legislation, allowing their local state law enforcement to mitigate drones, despite it being against federal law. And so we'll see. Anyway, we'll kind of pick up some of those topics as we go. But your host, David Lewin with Echodyne Radars. And again, thanks for joining us. I'll pass it to Charles for an introduction, and then Susan, I'll land with you. And, if you want to say anything, kind of kick off the topic a little bit, just top of mind, whether it's picking up where we were just talking backstage or just some of your initial thoughts on, mitigating drones for corrections. But anyways, Charles, I'll pass it to you. Just share a little bit about yourself and what you guys do at Drone Responders.
Sure. Thanks, David. I'm Charles Warner. I'm the retired fire chief from Charlottesville, Virginia, and the director of Drone Responders. Currently, we have just under 12,000 members with Drone Responders now, and participation from 92 countries. We focus on helping to advance the enabling of UAS, but we also have, and we participate with the Counter UAS Coalition on helping to move that counter UAS capabilities moving forward. So we're excited to be here, and there's a lot of great topics to discuss on this whole counter UAS aspect.
Awesome. Yeah, Susan.
I'm Susan Roberts. I'm the VP of Strategy and Business Development for Ondus Holdings. Ondus Holdings holds multiple companies in the drone and autonomy space. We have American Robotics and Aerobotics, Iron Drone, and most recently, I think it might be 3 days old, Aperio Motion, which is a ground robotics company. So one of those companies is a counter UAS system called Iron Drone, and it does not kill its target, right? It goes out and net captures it. It has a parachute that goes on it. So what we're trying to evolve on the prison space is the ability not only to see that the drone has entered the prison space, but to capture that drone so that we can preserve it for evidence and make sure that the evidence chain is such that the prosecution goes well every time, right? We have standard procedures, hopefully working with the ACA, where we can develop those standard procedures for the industry so that, every time a drone is deployed as a counter UAS measure, it's meaningful in prosecution.
Awesome. That's great. Well, Charles, I know you said you had some stats. Do you mind throwing some of those out? And while we're live as well, folks, feel free to comment in. And if you have any thoughts, questions for the panel, thoughts on, things that you've seen or heard around drones being used to deliver contraband, your opinions about mitigation, any of these topics that we're going to bring up, we'd love to make it a two-way conversation as much as possible while we are live. But yeah, with that, Charles, what were some of the stats that you've seen recently on?
Yes, I was looking up in 2024, the Bureau of Prisons reported 479 drone incursions and sightings at federal prison facilities. Now, what's important to note here is that doesn't include all the states. I can tell you specifically from Virginia, the number is higher, not higher than that, but is high on a regular occurrence as far as this happening, and it's going to continue to grow. Without any ability to deal with it, we're going to see this issue grow. And I know that we were talking before the show, and a lot of people are saying, well, are you worried about if they're dropping cigarettes or some kind of minor things? But what they've seen is no matter what you drop in a courtyard, it creates havoc.
Right.
It creates chaos. And I think in one situation, a person died in that fight over getting the contraband that was dropped. Not to mention the fact that if it's a weapon or something, it becomes more serious.
Yeah. Charles is absolutely right. Somebody got shot over contraband. I think it was last year, and the Bureau of Prisons has a fraction of the state level prisons, right? So if you think about Bureau of Prisons having 100-ish prisons, and there's another 1,800 prisons out in the states, and then there's all the county and lower level things, right? So it becomes a really, really broad problem. And it's not just the prisoners who are getting contraband, right? It's linking to gangs, it's linking to criminal networks, it's linking to, your person traveling through a small town who may be delivering contraband, it's in their car. Eventually that gets put on a drone, it goes in, right? And in talking with some of the special agents who are investigating this kind of things, there's very distinctive clues about this contraband came from this network, this contraband came from this other network, and they can kind of get a feeling for who's doing what where and how that's growing. And some of this has evolved into multi-state crimes and even RICO charges. So it's not a the prisoners are smoking cigarettes kind of deal. It's a really critical $13.5 billion problem in the United States.
And I'll just add that in the UK, for example, in a 10-month period ending October 2024, they had 1,296 drone incidents recorded in prisons in England and Wales. So I think this is an international problem. This is not just in the United States. And again, it's prisons and correctional facilities. I'm just going to say this right up front. They should have some priorities of getting these capabilities and authorities in place today, because they have the biggest problem of a lot of places that we're dealing with.
100%. Yeah, and I think I agree. And something Rob Green, I've heard him share, is that he uses the word crisis, in terms of where this is now. And the funny thing is, with 2209, Section 2209, with the flight restrictions over critical infrastructure, that we're hoping is going to be now, really enacted. And it did not include prisons until folks from this industry really did a lot of work with legislation and got the push and added at least state prisons to the list that could receive those flight restrictions. And of course, as many know out there, that in itself is not like some sort of a digital the way to stop a drone from flying. It's not a geofence that would make the drone not be able to fly, but it is at least a legal barrier, because currently it's not illegal to fly the drone over a state prison. But if they were able to get that enacted, then it would, just flying over the prison could become an actual crime, if you will, and something that they could then pursue as part of, as Susan mentioned, the string of, the court case and what they would need to prove if they were able to find the pilot and everything there. Anyways, hats off to that. But to your point, Charles, they really do need the ability to mitigate, I believe, amongst anyone, because every other sector is saying, what could drones be used for? They see what's happening in Ukraine and how they're being weaponized, and everyone's worried. But even, the electric utility space, for example, is still very sluggish to deploy detection technology if they're still not allowed to mitigate once they detect. And so, point being, it hasn't happened yet. They all say, well, if a huge incident happened, then suddenly the law would break through, right? But nothing has happened yet. That would, like sort of the 9/11 event. However, for prisons, for correctional facilities, it's happening every day. At certain ones, in certain states, many states have big rec yards, open air rec yards where multiple drones a day, sometimes even at the same time, are bringing in and delivering contraband. So it's a real threat. It's a real thing that's happening, and I think there's not enough awareness of it. Every time I tell a friend or somebody, that this is going on, they're always shocked, and they're like, "Well, it makes sense. That's they kind of follow the logic, but I don't think there's enough awareness of this issue." But
no, the conversations I have with my colleagues who are in war zones overseas, and my colleagues who are working on the prisons, uses the exact same language, right? Some have an accent, some don't have an accent, but you are hearing the exact same stories. They're coming in, they're using fiber optics, they're evolving daily. What we were facing 6 months ago as a threat isn't what we're facing today, because the technology has changed, or the usage of that technology has changed, right? So it's almost this living ecosystem inside of the United States that's a test bed for very bad activity, shall we say, right? And I think that the idea that you can go and share resources, maybe the prisons have a counter defense system and then the airport's needed or it needs to be bounced around. I think that's not really acknowledging the problem. I think these are things that need to be infrastructure grade responses that we wouldn't have to ask the prisons to have a fence that they take down because we're going to go use it for a festival and then we'll put it back up when the festival's done, right? This is a tool or an infrastructure piece of equipment that you need on that prison full time, right? It's the only way you're going to stop it. We've even had reports where somebody came in, put a counter UAS demo in, lasted for 2 weeks, and all the stuff stopped for 2 weeks. So your metrics looked like, terrible. Did you intercept anybody? Nope. Did you identify anybody? Nope. Well, that prison doesn't have a problem. Well, the thing is, the prison did have a problem. It's just that they're on their cell phone saying, well, it looks like the drone things are here. I see the big, trailer and they've got their logo on it. Maybe no deliveries this week. Right. And that's why permanence is going to help really solve this problem.
And, we've had some of these solutions are thinking about that you can call and get permission from the feds to do something. You don't have time. This has got to be set up to where you can detect, and if you have the threat, that you can mitigate. Yep. You don't have time to make a phone call. These things are moving so fast and are so accurate at what they're doing. One of the things we've learned from Ukraine is how deadly accurate these drones can be. And they can be commercial off-the-shelf drones. They're not expensive drones. To the extreme, and I think it was South Carolina, a drone helped to make an escape from a prison. Now, imagine, just think about this for a minute. You could have a fly cart drone come in and actually lift somebody up out of a courtyard and take off and leave the prison. So, I mean, you start thinking about all these possibilities. And Susan, I know you were talking about a solution that shoots a net and has a parachute on it. It's kind of a unique solution where you're dealing with the issue, but you're not creating a bigger problem with what happens to it when it goes down. And that's when David and I were talking before, I was like, we got to worry about all this stuff. But prisons are also usually isolated. They're usually in areas where whatever happens is going to be limited to that facility and not affect other people. So prisons is the perfect pilot project to figure some of this stuff out.
Right. Agreed. And they often have, the barriers of the prison or the fences here, and then they have a lot more land. So we would be able to target the incoming drones just outside of the fence, get the contraband just outside the fence. They usually have a person in a patrol car or truck with a dog or a robotic dog. And, the ability to really figure out how bad that neighborhood is per se, and what the problem is at that prison, and link that to other crimes or link that to things that are going on in a drug delivery ecosystem, starts getting us to prosecution levels at the DOJ level, not at the local sheriff level, right? And if we're going to make huge impacts, we have to understand that prisons aren't just the put people over here because they did the wrong thing, right? Once a criminal is doing the wrong thing and it's related to drugs, there's a good chance that they're going to try to continue to do that wrong thing from inside the prison.
Yeah, big time. Actually, we got hey Josh, we got a little background noise from you, but
it's all right.
But I wanted to pull Josh up here because he just did an interview with some former BOP folks that really focused on the counter drone or the drone issue. And Charles mentioned a stat from the BOP recently because they're tracking at the federal prisons their drone incursions that were actually, formally recognized. And so, Josh, they made a comment. I'm trying to recall from the call, but if you have any kind of thoughts from that conversation, feel free to throw them in.
Yeah, I think the most interesting or several interesting comments that were made in that show was federal prisons already have some ability to mitigate drones or at least restrict their airspace, but nobody's done it yet. So it's kind of the question of what additional tools they need to actually implement, protecting their airspace since they already have it. So it'll be interesting to see if maybe in the future federal prisons will, start implementing more of that counter drone technology since they do have the ability to control their airspace where a local, a state prison wouldn't have that, just the federal prisons do. And then another interesting comment that was made was just the scale of the contraband coming in now, because they had actual weapons with ammunition being smuggled by drone into some of these prisons. Actually, the same prison that Epstein was being held in. Later on, they actually had somebody smuggle in a firearm with ammunition in it, which was pretty significant. So the problem is just growing in scale, and it's kind of a question of when is that problem going to become enough to where the federal prisons might take those mitigation steps, and then eventually when might state prisons be able to start mitigating drones, and hopefully with the renewal of the 2209, state prisons may they might start looking at that as well, giving them some ability.
Yeah, I think you made an interesting point. You were talking about how some of the prisons had some permissions that they weren't using. I had the same conversation with an airport group about 6 months ago, where the Department of Homeland Security person was sitting there. That Department of Homeland Security person had the authority to shoot down a drone if it was intruding on airspace in the airport. And when the question was, would you? Like, what would propel you to say, go ahead and shoot that down on an active runway in an active airport? And he was like, why? Hey, he couldn't imagine it, right? And the reason he can't imagine it is because there's no standard operating procedures, right? Nobody's trained on it. Nobody's figured out, exactly, if I can identify it here, I've got this in, my Echodyne system. I've got this in my counter drone sites. I've got this permission. I've tested it. I've drilled on it. I've shooted off the drone before with no countermeasures, right? What do I do, right? And they have to walk through that several times. So they have to codify that. It's got to get blessed by an organization like ACA. It's got to be, everybody nodding their heads in unison that says, this is how we roll. This is how we do it, right? So when you're talking to Texas DPS or some of the other defense people or public safety people, what they say is, we have use of force protocols, right? They're highly developed. You know what you can do, what you absolutely can't do, and you know where the gray lines are that says, well, if the situation is really, really bad, you're going to lean in, right? And those kind of use of force Likert scales, where you have really high, really low criticality, are what you're going to have to develop for the prisons as a routine, as a stated, written down procedure that's been trained against before people are actually comfortable. So we can talk a lot about the technology because the technology is ready. If we don't start leaning in and helping the policymakers understand that the implementation is ready as well, then it's going to be very difficult. On the other hand, if the policymakers are like, no, we're never going to do this, nobody's going to spend the time and the money to develop those procedures. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Yeah, I'm just a huge proponent that there needs to be now hear me out,
Yes, sir.
federal facilitated process of what this looks like. What are the procedures? What are the decision process to go or no go as far as mitigation? And it's very well understood. Then it gets into the selection of the technology. What technology are you going to use in the particular venue or area that you're operating? Because there are some hazards. If you do jamming, you put potentially jamming medical systems, or you can jam pacemakers or other things. So you've got collateral things that you have to think about. That's the big thing is, if I take the drone down, is that better or worse than the situation out of a head just to let it fly on through? And that depends on the threat. But that's where you clearly have to have the detection. You have the ability to identify. You have to have the ability to classify, and then determine whether you mitigate or not. And I think that federal, I'll use the bomb technicians as an example. That's done as a federal process. Everybody's taught at every level, local, state, federal, that this is our policies and our procedures to do that. And this needs to be the same going forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I do hear that there is some movement there with the recent executive orders. I just spoke with some folks here in DC with the FBI that were really excited about rolling out. I believe it's about 12 agencies that are not federal agencies, statewide law enforcement and others that are very soon. I don't have the exact dates, going to be getting some of that training, kind of like that bomb tech comment I've heard you make, Charles, where there's that common federal training for that. I do believe there's some rollout of that one of the recent executive orders helped initiate and spark. I have some buddies, with a couple of the state police agencies that we work with Echodyne, and they're a handful of them are actually sending some of their folks to this. They're pretty excited as well. and it will train them and then allow them some measure of being, of being allowed to, or having a waiver, whatever that looks like, to be able to use mitigation technologies within their regions, which would be really cool. I mean, at least there's some progress there. I know we've been talking about it and dancing around this in the industry for a long time, but it does sound like there's some movement.
Well, my hat's off to the FBI for all the great work they've done. They've been the first ones out of the box, really figuring out the policies and procedures. But this really needs to be codified. We really need to have legislative action to move this forward. A few handful groups is a great start to learn from, but it's still too little, too late. We need Congress to act.
Yes.
Charles or Chief Warner, what do you think about some of the states passing their own drone mitigation laws? Because obviously they're going to get knocked down in federal court because, they're not allowed to override a federal law, right? But do you think that might push the federal government to start doing some of that? Or do you think that will just cause more confusion, the state laws being passed right now for drone mitigation?
I think, first of all, the states have moved forward because they've been so frustrated of not being able to act. The FAA does not have the wherewithal and the resources to deal with these issues. That's why some states are looking at codifying the FAA rules so that they have some ability to do things at a local level. The one difference at correctional facilities is that where you can't necessarily control the airspace, you can still deal with the issue of contraband, because that's an illegal practice. So you can deal with that even though you're not dealing with airspace. As far as the states, I think they're trying to force the issue. They're trying to push forward to say, if you're not going to do it, we're going to do it, and the heck with you. And in reality, do I think the feds are going to come after these locals for doing it? No, I don't think they are. But the key component I would have if I was one of the officers having to do that would be the liability. Is that if I take that down and there is some kind of collateral damage that occurs, what liability follows up? And then attorneys are going to have a field day of saying, this doesn't meet federal requirements, and then you're going to be caught up in that.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely needs to move forward. I was really excited to see some of the president's executive orders back in June that really freed up some airspace, no pun intended, to do some things in the unmanned industry and really push things forward. One of the requests from the EO is to bring back a live project. What could we do that would be accretive to the industry, that can be sponsored all the way up at the federal level, that can move things forward? And I think one of the things that we should be really thinking about is, how do we put together a sandbox that could test some of these things out, start developing those SOPs, have federal sponsorship, both from the policy perspective and maybe from the funding perspective, that can be used as a test bed to say, here are some options. You can do it this way with this technology. You can do it this way with this other technology. Not a one-size-fits-all technology, even though I sell technology, because I think that you need to future-proof it a little bit, right? You need to say, here's the parameters for safety. Here's the parameters for operations and for identification. Now, what do you want to do? How do you want in your locality to fix your particular problem?
We did have a question come through. And I thought maybe, Charles, you might be able to speak to this from the law enforcement perspective. Somebody asked, is there any documentation on the use of force protocols? Because we've kind of started to dance around that, with could you use that use of force as a reason for mitigating a drone if you could prove, let's say, that a drone had a weapon on board and it's coming towards your prison, it's about to drop. You've got the radar track, you got the camera footage, you have what you need in court to say this use of force against that drone was justified and I can prove it front to finish. We've danced around that a little bit on the podcast in previous episodes. And I'm just kind of curious, just from maybe not even related to drones, but just how does that typically read, or how do those protocols typically work within the law enforcement agency?
Well, they pretty much define your action based on what's occurring. And the levels increase based on the threat that you're facing. But I think that you're still in that same legal quagmire, if you will, that are you lucky? Did you get it all and it's right? And yes, you got it. Well, then it's probably not going to be a problem. But if you thought it was and it wasn't, so you're really kind of rolling the dice when you're doing that. And then what if what you're doing happens to take down an aircraft with people on board? You're kind of, we're dancing around a lot of issues. This is where Congress has to clearly define what this looks like and give the authorities and have that ability so we don't have conflict of the laws.
To answer your question a little bit differently, if we were thinking about applying use of force doctrine or laws to this problem in developing standard operating procedures or in pushing for new policy, there's a couple of case law things that you could do. And I'm going to look down just to read them to you. The one is Connor and Graham, and that's objective reasonableness, right? Would a reasonable person expect that this is a really bad scenario and that use of force would be justified, right? And then there's another one, which is a malicious intent one, and that's Hudson and McMillan. And it's, do you believe that the person was operating in good faith? Or, were they having a malicious intent, right? Was their objective to go beat the guy, or was their objective to really stop a crime from happening, right? And so those two doctrines are kind of the guiding principle, but there are training courses in the police departments that are like, this is how you're going to act if you think you're going to use force, right? And so I talked to, can I mention the real name, or do I have to code this? I talked to a police officer in Texas several weeks back about use of force and whether that could be a possible operation here. And his indication was that he thought that was one of the most grounded things in their operation. They drilled on that all the time. They trained on that all the time. They really wanted to be sure that when they did use force, that they were justified in doing so, and applied in this context seemed to make sense. So I think that there's good, we'll call it a working taxonomy that we could apply. We just have the work to do to develop that.
But I think that I agree with you wholeheartedly. That is exactly right. I think the key point, though, is that next step of when I take this action, what's going to be the result?
That's right.
Am I dropping it in the middle of a group of people that can create injury or death?
Yep.
So is it better for me to let it go, or is it potentially having a threat of having an explosive on board that could actually kill a lot of people if it drops it? So then I have that guidance has to be in place to give me that benefit, that risk benefit factor.
Right. And I think we're in a situation where that guidance is going to be updating so frequently, right? What we saw in Ukraine was, they started using drones for surveillance. What's the landscape look like? Are the opposing troops close to me or close to where I think they are? Okay, there they are. Now the troops will go get them. And that's evolved rapidly into a loitering munition type of scenario, right? The prisons are going to be no different. We'll put in a measure. They'll put in a countermeasure. We'll put in another measure, right? And so having that training be updated in real time, updated, continuously, and not like, oh, one and done. Whatever happened in 2025 for use of force justification is good to go. That's going to have to get updated every year. Think of it as continuing education credits.
And that's why that federal unified overall facilitation is needed.
Yes.
Because as those things evolve, we've got to be able to communicate that down in real time.
Agreed.
Big time. Yeah, that was something that came out in a recent episode on the podcast as well, was that need for even this whole like remote ID conversation, right? And we were getting deep diving into that same thing where it has to be somehow real time for them to get the valid information, the way that they could like run a license plate or something to that effect, law enforcement, but be able to do something that quick, that immediate, to validate based on sort of that remote ID license plate in the sky, so to speak. And the technology's not there yet in that world, but that was a whole other conversation, but I just thought that was interesting.
Well, I think that in and of itself becomes a problem, because the remote ID is not necessarily going to be transmitted by drones that have nefarious purposes. So that just the remote ID is not going to do it.
Yeah, and I think one interesting piece of the puzzle now too is, last week I was talking with somebody who'd worked extensively with cartels out of Mexico, and he was saying the cartels, man, have a massive war chest as far as money they have on hand. They've been sending folks down to Ukraine to study how they've been using drones, and I think it was like this week they've been using drones to using jammers to drone our drones on the border. So the question is how long until they start to maybe militarize, if there's somebody they want to take out in a prison yard and send a drone in. So it seems like it's just a matter of time until something like that happens, especially at these federal facilities. You're holding these really, high priority prisoners.
Well, and I think that's one of the problems with the slowness of policy, right? And I won't beat up the FAA because I think lots of people have been beating them lately. Policy is inevitably slow. Most of the time, people appreciate that, right? With the rapid change of technology we'll call it since the early 2000s, it just hasn't been able to keep up. We haven't developed any kind of frameworks to allow policy to be informed about what technology is out there and to allow for continuous evolution of policy, right? When we think about whether or not the Ukrainian best practices, as we'll call them, have already emerged in the United States, they have, right? And what better training bed for federal forces or for Homeland Security than what we're seeing in prisons, who have an active adversary who is well incentivized to do the wrong thing on prisons. For me, it's a microcosm of how dangerous the world could be and is in some areas, and it's real life training for our people.
Yeah, I think if we learned anything from the New Jersey drone sightings, we found out how woefully inadequate we are of identifying what is in the airspace and what are its intentions.
Yeah, agreed.
Totally. So one point I want to go back to is the fact that when you get a hold of a drone, if it was used for nefarious purposes, there is a tremendous amount of forensic data on the drone that can be, even like pushed to DOJ or other, and even these state prison networks have pretty advanced forensic capability now, to break into do what they need to do within their legal protocols with cell phones that they find, but then also with drones. And whenever they can tap into that drone that maybe crashed, for example, that's how they typically would get a hold of one today, is it was like inbound or outbound to deliver contraband, ran into some trees or, had some malfunction and then crashed. They found it, used forensics, and, there's just like a massive RICO case, right, that you've maybe alluded to, Susan, but there's an awesome special agent we all know down there that helped uncover that whole, over 150 people now in this RICO case from a ring of folks in Georgia that were part of this whole drone delivery network with contraband. All that to say, when they would capture drones or find them crashed, they would find information on them that would lead them to the individual who owned it, or and to their literally home address, because they would do test flights from their house, and they would literally be in the video of the drone on the first videos logged on it of them in front of their house with their home address on the side of the, and so they, though they're very sophisticated, there's still data that gets stored deep inside of the drones, in the metadata, even on, whether it's video footage or even just location data, that's tracked and kind of hard coded sometimes into the drone. All that then to say, to kind of springboard into Susan and some of the technology that you guys are deploying with your own drone systems that are out and about, or able to be launched, at the time something's detected. I kind of want to think about that. There's the net capture piece that, again, today at a prison, state prison, wouldn't be federally legal, right, to go and take the drone out of the sky with the net. But I'd like to hear just some of your thoughts on capturing it with a net, letting it land, and getting a hold of that forensic data. Speak to that. And then secondly, though, can you launch more than one drone, and could you actually use the drones today to chase the nefarious drone? If got a radar lock on it, could you actually chase it back and maybe get video footage of the license plate, the vehicle, and maybe lead to an arrest there while we're waiting for legislation? Just kind of tee that up and talk about that a bit.
Sure. So let me describe our system. It's an autonomous system. You would have the box installed. While the box is portable, it's about 70 pounds. Install the box. You can put 3 drones inside of it. Those 3 drones can shoot out within 30 seconds of each other. As the drone flies, it's a racer drone, so it can fly 80 to 120 miles an hour, so pretty quickly. And it can do a few different things, right? So number one, the scenarios that we've talked to our special agents about, we've talked to them about having one drone follow the contraband drone, one drone provide oversight, kind of hover and look and get a picture of the whole situation, which inmates are coming out to retrieve anything, who's on duty, et cetera, et cetera. And then the third drone would go try to figure out where the pilot is, right? And chase those down. And yes, indeed, it could go back to the car and it could get that license plate number. Now, I'm going to caveat that. A lot of the people who are flying these drones are not coming anywhere near the prison side at the moment, right? They're a couple miles off. They have some ability to avoid detection. That becomes a little more difficult at the moment, but the capability is theoretically there. I think where we're really going to see the value is in the first two drones who are providing the Overwatch service and who are grabbing that intruder drone and bringing that down with a net. That net has a parachute as well, so it's not going to crash the intruder drone to the ground and decimate it. It's going to bring it down gently. And we've already talked about shooting it right outside of the prison yard so that it's, landing in kind of neutral space. And then it can be picked up and collected by a guard and immediately have that data transferred. One of the things that we're really keen to work through is that chain of custody for the data, so that the prosecutors get data that's, it fell on the ground at 12:01 midnight because most things are coming in the middle of the night. The guard picked it up at 12:05. The guard got the SIM card out of it. We transferred the data and uploaded it from the guard's truck into the risk centers, which are the kind of the prison's regional centers. And that data was then secure. The chain was secure. And by the way, the SIM card got put into a special storage container and also submitted in for evidence, right? So that we don't have issues with privacy concerns. We don't have issues with, that wasn't the real data. You made that up, right? And that becomes very, very important. I think that when you have prosecutions based on, we think they were flying the drone over the prison, we have the evidence that it was there, we think it delivered something, but we never captured the drone, right? The drone is long gone. That becomes a lot harder to make that prosecution sticky. And that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that if these guys are caught, we prosecute them and we take them off the streets.
That's the benefit of a RICO case is you can do them and their affiliates, and you start to be able to reach into some networks that you couldn't have before, if it's kind of classified as that. I'm going to bring Brandon Youngblood's calling in. I'm going to see if we can catch him. Brandon, if you're out there, you can say hi, but I'll just, you came off mute. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hey,
Hello, everyone.
Hey, man. I wanted to thanks for calling in. I wanted to get some of your take. We've been bantering a little bit here. Of course, we're talking about contraband delivery via drones at prisons, and then the ability and maybe future ability here to mitigate the drone, do something about it. Curious what your take is from the legislation standpoint, with your experience, obviously in heavily from former FAA, all the counter UAS law, and there's so many pending laws coming up and so much legislation, right? Whether it's the extension of the authorities for the federal agencies is pending right now, and what may be added to that to push things down to state and local level. There's the training that you and I talked about recently that the FBI is rolling out for 12 state level agencies that may be able to start doing some mitigation. And then there's the states themselves, Louisiana, Arizona, and now Texas is about to pop with the state level approval to mitigate a drone, despite it still being federally illegal. But just want to get kind of your, I mean, we all kind of know that those things are there and pending, but what is your opinion on where things are going to go, Brandon, in the midst of those for state prisons to be able to mitigate at some point?
Yeah. So, and if I start cutting out, please let me know. It's been hit and miss where I'm at. So, a couple of things. I don't really want to talk about where we're gonna go, because I think the writing on the wall that it's going to expand beyond what it is today, because it's very restricted today, and we're not going to go backwards. So, what I want to really do, and something that I've talked about with a lot of folks lately, is self-defense. And so let's before we get there, let's put the conversation in two paths. One is detection. Prisons are the best worst case scenario that you can possibly imagine for UAS detection and mitigation. It's a very isolated, self-contained environment where these drones are only going to want to go in particular places where the inmates are, because the whole purpose is to drop contraband, unless they're doing some type of counter surveillance for a potential escape or something like that. But for the most part, The main concern is dropping contraband within the prison. So with detection systems, there are so many different technologies out there that would definitely not implicate it's in USC chapters 119 and 206, which is wiretap pen trap laws. There's a lot of camera systems out there. There's advanced radar systems like Echodyne. There you go, David. But a lot of systems that do not necessarily capture and decode RF signals. You still have remote ID. I understand it's not the greatest, and those doing these criminal activities are probably not going to be broadcasting, but there are a lot of options, especially when you're talking about a very small and contained area like a prison. There's a lot of back-end object trackers out there now that leverage currently deployed CCTV cameras. All you really got to do is take those cameras and point them up and then put the background software into it to do that object tracking. So that's detection. So all of that can be done today. Now, mitigation, I want to break apart a little bit because RF mitigation, I would definitely not go down that road for a prison setting based on the way the current laws are written, because you're now hitting some FCC issues and some stuff like that. There's some limited kinetic options, but for me personally, and this is not me trying to sell ONDIS, there are other systems out there too that have the ability to intercept and take down drones very, very, very safely. Now, Department of Justice has said it. I was in the conference when they said it on the panel. Everybody has the right to self-defense. So what I would argue is if you see a drone and it's over a prison and it has an unknown package and it is hovering over a populated grounds, you have every right that you need to defend those inmates and those guards on the ground, period. In my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. Go talk to a lawyer. The reason why, other than Department of Justice saying what they said in the past, is like Josh was saying about the cartels. The only thing I want to change with what Josh said is it is happening today. There are many, many, many videos out there of cartels dropping bombs on each other just 100 miles south of the border in Solanola. And then there's a prison in Ecuador. That prison's roof has been blown up twice from drones from a rival cartel trying to kill another inmate who was a cartel member in that prison. So it's all there. So when you see a drone flying over a prison, you don't know what it's going to do. And if it drops something, I would say definitely take it out. And if it's carrying an unknown package, I would say there's a high probability of a self-defense clause in there. Leveraging technology like ONDIS is the best option and safest way to remove that threat.
One interesting thing, Brandon, talking about self-defense, actually, this is one of my passion projects. I was talking with a lawyer in PA, and he does a lot with aircraft and things like that. And he sent me over one of their state statutes. And actually, wardens have the ability to defend, like under their self-defense statute, like prison wardens are given the ability to defend not only their inmates, but defend order within the prison. So if you have a drone flying over and that can cause a disruption of orderly conduct in the prison, they can actually take that out as self-defense, and that's in like the Title 18, the PA Consolidated Chapter 5 for their self-defense, and that's Section 509. But yeah, that even I don't know every state has that, but definitely in Pennsylvania, the warden of a prison could take out a drone just because it's causing disruption under self-defense.
The biggest problem you'll run into there is preemption of federal law. So a state can't say something is not illegal if the federal government says it's illegal. So the state may not prosecute you, but you're still subject to federal criminal law under Title 18, which is 18 USC 32, and then there's a title within 49 USC, but at the end of the day, the Department of Justice would prosecute it. So while I think that helps with maybe some type of defense and that we were acting under state law, but they could take that to federal court. And I'm going to say could very loosely, because all of this is predicated on the fact that the Department of Justice is going to investigate and prosecute. I would highly doubt that the Department of Justice is going to go prosecute a federal prison because they took down a drone carrying an unknown package over a prison and there's a potential 18 USC 32 violation. Highly doubt it. So while I understand the law is the law and we're abiding legal, nation, whatever, there's that possibility that we have to consider too. And it's all about legal risk rather than just threat risk. And to me, if I were a warden, that's a legal risk I would take.
So, like Brandon, I'm not a lawyer. I would agree with Brandon that there is a compelling case that we're going to have to start mitigating these risks, and we're going to have to start mitigating them with a counter UAS deployment of some kind, and that detection is not enough. And I think that that sense is shared up and down the food chain, throughout law enforcement, even through people who are on airports, people who are in prisons, et cetera, et cetera. This is becoming too much of a problem. And, all new technologies give you new problems, right? Like screen time. So I think that what we're going to have to see is an endorsement through some of the prison or correction organizations that say, these are our standard procedures. This is when we think use of force is justified. We understand that currently it's not legal. And then we need to really push on the policy at the federal level, because the FAA has done a really good job of standing their ground and defending their rights to say we protect all airspace. But maybe they haven't taken into account the damage that's being done out in the world.
Yeah, there's an interesting book called Predictable Surprises.
Ooh.
And it really is about the things we were surprised about that were all predictable. 9/11 was predictable. We just considered to ignore it. And I think that the dangers we see from drones coming are predictable. We've seen how Ukraine has used this in such a way. So prisons are one area, but we are so vulnerable in so many areas. And I would just say, as we look toward next year, we're going to have some pretty big international implications. And we're going to have some controversial countries in the United States. Yep. So if you look at how they've been used, I think we have a real concern to get ahead of this very quickly.
Well, I think so too. That's a good point, because we have the Olympics coming up and we have the World Cup coming up. We have lots of events that's going to
FIFA, right?
Be world stage events that we owe it to the people who are coming to visit and have a good time and enjoy the games to be safe.
Yeah, big time.
I'd
Brandon,
like to just throw, just one thing that Charles says is really important is, it's about airspace security at the end of the day. And right now, all federal prisons, at least as far as I know, and this is what I did in the FAA, was coordinate their 14 CFR 99.7s over these federal prisons, because they house federal or national security threats to the United States inside these prisons. So that airspace is blocked off through a national security flight restriction or airspace restriction, and comes with that are criminal and civil penalties if you violate that. That is also a means to say, hey, Bureau of Prisons does have congressional authority to mitigate drones, because they fall under the DOJ veil and under 6 U.S.C. 124N. However, on the state prison systems in the county, they technically do not. But if they house, and some of them do, and I had this conversation with DOJ about a year and a half ago, some of these prisons do house national level interest people who could be deemed a threat to national security if they were escaped or got out. So the conversation was, hey, can the Department of Justice and the FBI sponsor 14 CFR 99.7 airspace restriction over some of these state county prisons? And the answer ultimately was yes. So if those prisons who have these types of inmates in there, I would highly advise them to work with their local FBI and DOJ counterparts on the CUAS policy side and say, hey, we heard this was an option. Can we do this? And that gives you another legal authority and mechanism to exercise some control of the airspace above the facility. The other thing too is, if you exercise the self-defense means and leverage on this technology, it gives you more legal defense, saying they violated now a national security airspace restriction. We thought we had no other option to protect the inmates and our guards but to take action.
That's brilliant. Yeah, Brandon, I appreciate that. And shout out to, back to you, Brandon, if folks are listening out there and they want to pursue what he just advised on trying to get that flight restriction added to their system, then call Brandon, connect with him on LinkedIn, give him a shout, because he's got a lot of experience in that, knows exactly how that process works. And so if you need some consulting.
And one last Yeah, and one last thing I want to throw out there too for someone to speak with is the FBI. I'm not sure if I'm okay to drop his name, so I'm gonna play it safe and say no, unless David, you heard differently. But there is a gentleman in the FBI who runs a counter UAS office out of Alabama and Huntsville, and he is a fantastic person to talk to and to speak with. They offer training to SLTT, law enforcement, correctional facilities, and everything else to help them prepare and understand drone threats, how to deal them, and what is legally, sketchy and what's, black and white, and then what other types of efforts they can take place. So, David, if he told you that it's fine sharing his name, go ahead. But I don't.
I know I'm hesitant, but I will. I did talk to him. He may be able to get permission to come on a future episode. So I'll make sure that you're on there as well, because then maybe we can do a little bit more promotion of that capability that they have of the training, so that other folks can benefit from that. I want to go back to one thing, Brandon, and I wanted to clarify this. It sounded like you were saying if folks follow the self-defense framework, you feel like that fits within current law and they're safer, and correct me if I'm wrong here, versus if they try to follow, let's say, a new state legislation that says go ahead and mitigate because the state of Texas now, once that rolls out, says you can. If they say, well, the state said I could do it, so I did it, do you feel like that's a weaker argument or a lot more risk exposure than, hey, we have the justified use of force to self-defense because of X, Y, Z, whatever, the video footage, this, that, the other, we had all that lined up. We had to defend our people and play it safe. Like, would that be a better than argument that would probably hold up in court versus the airspace side?
Yeah. So here's the analogy. In Colorado, recreational marijuana growing and smoking is legal. That doesn't stop the DEA from coming in and arresting you and pressing charges federally. So you are 100% legally exposed. And if they say, well, Colorado says I can, I don't care. The United States government didn't say you can. So that's not a protection. That's one of the things I've been trying to be very vocal about, is these state laws that say you can do it, is putting those people who are executing the mission at potential legal peril because they have this false sense of legal protection, but the states can't prevent the federal government from coming in and pressing federal charges. It's not how it works. So to me, I've always been trying to, on the self-defense thing is, and maybe this is more my military side of things, but I'm not just going to stand there and let a drone that I think has a potential bomb on it, because I can visually see it. It is doing something that I deem as threatening to me. I can potentially take action. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer. I would hire a lawyer and try to make that reasonable threat determination, against the court based on my perspective. But to me, it's very viable. Department of Justice has been out there. They've said it. And so I just think you have to create solid policy around self-defense, and then train your people under what circumstances, threat determinations, etc., that would be a meaningful justification to take action. You can't just say, hey, we're going to throw this under self-defense, good luck, and then they start shooting rounds in the sky. That's not how it's going to work. They have to create policy, the training around it, and advise their people, you're on the front line, you got to make these very fast decisions. Here's everything to equip you to make that decision.
I think what Brandon brings up here shows there's so much surrounding this. There are so many issues around what, when, how, where, and what you can do and how to protect yourself, which leads me to this next point of saying that we as drone responders have had a number of different working groups that we've created. And I think we would be interested in helping to create a correctional facility working group to help bring people together, because we've learned the best way you advance the technology is learning from others and catching those best practices and sharing those policies and procedures. And Susan, you and I can talk offline to see if maybe there's something we can do. And David, maybe you can reach out to Robert Green and see if there's an interest in doing something there. But we would be willing to do that, to bring people together, to start sharing the information and putting a repository in place where people could come and see what's out there. So just an offer from drone responders.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and if Josh and Susan, when you're there in person this weekend, if there's a chance to bring that up with Rob as well, Executive Director Rob Green, then I'm sure he'd be all ears. And I love that, Charles. I think that's brilliant. And Susan and Josh, you're going to be there in person. talking to correctional facilities this whole weekend. I mean, tomorrow and the next day, it's going to be like a whole expo, right? There's going to be correctional facilities from around the country. So good luck with that. And then also, pick up these conversations where we left off with the correctional institutions themselves. And if you're out there listening and you're going to ACA, they're in Denver, connect with Susan, connect with Josh. Josh is bringing mics and camera and everything too, to do some recording for the podcast while he's there. So, you may be able to slip into a session on that, but I want to say that. Charles, did you have something to say? And then Susan, I'll let you kind of close us out with whatever you want to share as well.
I just want to say briefly, we don't realize how vulnerable we are right now.
Josh,
if you look at the DC Sniper, and what it did, one person or two people in a vehicle did to that entire community, imagine now a concerted effort to attack open stadium, open air events would do to our entire country.
Right. No, I agree with Charles' point. I think that there's a clear present danger that we've not addressed, and we've not made it a priority to address. And it's difficult to talk about. A lot of people want to live their life without having to think about protection. Right. I have members of the military in my family, and I'm so grateful that they're members of the military, because I don't feel personally like really good about going and holding a gun. Right. And I think that this kind of ecosystem that needs to be developed to create safety in this new era of technology takes a lot of deliberate effort. And I'm excited that we're actually talking about the possibility of doing it, as opposed to continuing to talk about, well, it's not allowed. Right. Well, maybe eventually. CUAS has been fighting for, shall we say, recognition that it's important, and fighting for recognition that it should be legal. And I don't think it should be legal ubiquitously. I think it should be legal to authorize trained security personnel in certain areas and in certain locations. Just like I think police officers have special permissions to do things that the average citizen doesn't have permission to do. And so we're looking forward to working with the broader community to integrate the technology into the data systems and into the prosecutorial systems and into the working police and security systems that are out there existing now.
Absolutely. Can you just share one thing? And Brendan came off mute, so I'll pass it to you, Brendan, in a second. But Susan, if people want to see the Iron Drone in action, the net capture drone system launches 3 drones at a time when something is detected, right? When a threat's detected, and it can chase them down and net capture and parachute down and do all of that, Overwatch. If they want to see that, aren't you guys doing some things in person? I don't know if you can invite people to them, but I mean, is there any way
a lot of the things we're doing are restricted access. It's a little bit difficult right now to see the Iron Drone in action. We do have a video. It's on YouTube. You can type it in, Iron Drone Aerobotics. It's on YouTube. It's cool. I'll send you the video so you can send out the link. But we are doing something in San Diego soon. I think that's a permission-based thing. We're hopeful that we'll be down in the southern states over the next couple of months, and that we'll be able to do some demos. And we would certainly want to do demos for anybody in law enforcement or corrections and get them much more familiar with the technology.
For sure. Awesome. And Brandon, go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to leave everybody with just one thing. You're not helpless here. You don't, nobody needs to sit and watch a drone fly over a prison loaded with an obvious payload, drop a thing, and not do anything about it. That's not how this works. You're not helpless. So I keep 6 months worth of food in a closet that's dark, not because I need it just in case I run out of food in my fridge. It's for the extremes. And so given the certain situation that these prisons are having, you're facing a lot of extreme situations. You have that ability to defend. And that's why I think investing in systems like OwnDis, Iron Drone, is incredibly useful to have there. And you can use it for other things like perimeter surveillance and et cetera, while the law does get straightened out to give you more flexibility. But you will face an extreme situation. You don't want to be defenseless when that situation happens. So, and that's one of the main differences between RF jamming is there's a lot of FCC laws against the jamming thing that Ondas Iron Drone would not be subject to because of the way their technology works. So you have a lot more flexibility.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Charles, Susan, Josh, Brandon, and another great edition. I guess thanks for everyone who listened in as well, for your time, the comments in, and we'll see you again next week.
And
Live
Josh,
and
if
ready.
you see anybody out there, talk to them about the working group. Let me know.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.